Hi, my name is Freya Serafina. I'm a PhD student in women's spirituality, and today I want to talk about the largely forgotten women in the Buddha's life, specifically three mothers in the Buddha's life, including his own mother and stepmother. I think this is really important to talk about. Like most organized religions today, Buddhism has been influenced by patriarchal leanings. If we look at old literature, old texts, we can pinpoint where things begin to change with most, if not all, religious traditions. And this needs to be re examined. The way that these texts, this literature, these holy scripts, if you will, have been transformed, doctored, hidden, erased, are incredibly significant for women today, women from all walks of life. Gender bias needs to be examined, not just in religious texts, but in everything, right? There are a lot of accounts that claim certain things that the Buddha has said that are actually either untrue, doctored, taken vastly out of context. And what that has led to largely is this idea that women are inferior to men in some way. When in fact, the first people to be converted to Buddhism was a laywoman, a mother, Sujata, who we're going to talk about in just a bit. So the Buddha lived at a time when an indigenous, matriarchal, tribal culture proliferated in village life. In fact, he was raised by a harem of women in the women's quarters. And the sacred feminine appears in the Buddha's life not just through women in his own life, personal women, real human women in his own life, but through multiple goddesses that appear as well. And in the Sanskrit, the Pali literature, and almost all of the literature that we have for Buddhism, we find these forgotten stories of a number of women and goddesses that male monastics have sought to erase, change, hide in order to make the Buddha appear as if he never had any humanly traits, or maybe he never did anything sinful or wrong or un-Buddha like. But what this does, probably not inadvertently, is that it casts women in an inferior light. However, it is incompatible to simultaneously hold views that include bias and be enlightened at the same time. Indeed, by definition, bias cannot exist within an enlightened mind. Otherwise, it wouldn't be enlightened. And so I actually find it to be quite offensive that when male monastics rewrote a lot of the early literature and stories and real historical accounts as well as mythology surrounding the Buddha, that they painted him to be biased. And if people are watching this and they're thinking, oh, how could you say the Buddha is biased? How could you say something like that? I'm not saying it. The male monastics who rewrote all of the tales is saying it. When in truth, when we piece together the stories of the Buddha's life, we find quite the opposite. And so did Wendy Garling, who wrote this book right here, Stars at Dawn, Forgotten Stories of Women in the Buddha's Life. This is an exceptional book. This is incredible. Not only is it beautiful, which is why I picked it up to begin with. I thought the cover was very beautiful. That's how I make decisions. But what I learned in this book is so interesting. And for anyone who's interested in Buddhism, who's interested in, women in religion, women's spirituality, this book is an easy read, but it is quite academic. And what I mean by that is Wendy Garling does an exceptional job interrogating the text and doing lots and lots of comparison across a broad spectrum of texts. But the language is really accessible. It's accessible for people who are academics like myself, but my focus isn't Buddhism. And it's accessible for lay people, people who aren't academics. So I think it's a really interesting read. When I was in high school, maybe, I was really, really attracted to the idea of Buddhism because I was really attracted to the idea of peace. I'm still attracted to the idea of peace, but that's not where I ended up going with my studies and my own spiritual focus. Um, but if I were in high school again, in early college, I was really interested as well, actually. And I had found a book like this that spoke to the significant roles that women held in this religious tradition, maybe things would have been a little bit different for me. And so, if you're on a path of discovery and you're looking for something that might be helpful, I would recommend this book, and I'll put it in the put a link to it below where you can purchase. So it's not just women that were hidden, or rather, their roles were made significantly less and less in the Buddhist life. There are other things that these writers glossed over and changed and erased that spoke to his humanness. Because if we remember, Siddhartha, the Buddha, was an actual historical figure, he was a real person. And in glossing over his humanness, so things like apparently being very sensual and having lots of partners, having multiple wives, therefore having multiple children, when we erase all of this, we erase something that's actually really beautiful and crucial. We erase this idea that humans, even though they are flawed, can achieve momentous, magnanimous, significant things in life. That they can start over, that they can embark on a new path, that they can seek truth and enlightenment and seek harmony and order and beauty and peace in the world, even though they have made mistakes. And I think it's really a disservice to the philosophies of Buddhism and to humankind to erase the humanness that we find in the Buddha. But one of the most significant themes that starts to come forward, especially after reading Stars at Dawn, is that when we start to piece these stories together from multiple literary texts and Buddhist traditions, we begin to see a significant theme emerge around mothers, and that includes the Buddha's own mother, Maya. So, like Mary, mother of Jesus, Maya was chosen by the gods to give birth to the Buddha. Apparently, she was the perfect woman. She had all of these wonderful traits that were needed in order to be a vessel to carry the Buddha into his last rebirth before he attained complete enlightenment. And I'm going to skip ahead to her birth story because this is incredibly significant, beautiful, and deeply, deeply sad as well. So, when she was nearing her birth, she carried the Buddha for 10 months. And as she's nearing her birth, she wants to travel to Lumbini's Grove. Now, Lumbini's Grove is a place for women. It's lush, beautiful gardens. There's a goddess in the trees, in the nature, a protector goddess in Lumbini's Grove. And women would travel traditionally to give birth. And Maya would have been surrounded by countless women. It was a space just for women. And it was also away from where she was living in the castle, with her husband, the Buddha's father, Suddhodana. And so she traveled back to her homelands in order to give birth. She knew the Buddha was coming. She knew the baby was coming. And so she hastened very quickly to the grove. And what's really interesting about Lumbini's Grove and the goddess that lives here, Abhaya Devi, protector goddess, is that it's still used today by women as a sacred site. So it remains a site sacred to village women, where practices associated with fertility and the mother goddess tradition are non-Buddhist and more Aboriginal in nature, though a well-worn shrine to Maya is still venerated. There's a spring festival honoring the goddess that's held there each year, coinciding with a Buddhist celebration of Vesak, which commemorates the Buddha's birth. And recent archaeological discoveries suggest that this goddess site has been continuously inhabited for thousands of years, at least since the time of the Buddha. So we see themes of a sacred grove, of trees, of nature, of sacred springs and lush water. We see that across traditions as being sacred sites, typically for goddesses to inhabit. We see a lot of that in Crete, in Greece. I mean, we see it all over the place. In Ireland, we can throw caves into the mix as these really sacred places where women could go and convene with the goddess through nature, and also as a place to give birth, and as a place to die. I just did a paper on wombs and tombs, and how caves were places of birth, death, and rebirth. That's a video for another day. But what's significant about this grove, not only does Maya give birth, but she also dies here. She dies 7 days after giving birth to the Buddha. So she's experiencing great pain. She's surrounded completely by women, including her sister, Mahaprajapati. I apologize if the inflection is in the wrong place. Her sister is holding onto her side as she gives birth. She reaches up and she grabs onto a tree, and the baby is born from her side. So the popular legend, as well as ancient iconographic representations, further tell us that the infant Buddha was born miraculously from his mother's right side, thereby avoiding a vaginal birth. So the legends try to distance the death of Maya and the birth of the Buddha from one another by stating that she died 7 days after birth. Most legends assert that bodhisattvas and Buddhas cannot cause any kind of harm. They do not cause harm to their mothers in childbirth. And so there's this distancing that happens between Maya's death and the birth of her son. And that made me really emotional when reading this. Because what happens shortly thereafter is that a bunch of goddesses that come out from the sky, and they're singing to Maya, and they're rejoicing in the birth of the son, but they also remind us that Maya is human. And they ask her questions like, how are you feeling? How is the baby? Are you in a lot of pain? They ask her these questions, and although Maya has just done this miraculous thing, giving birth to this person who will go on to form an entire new religious faith, and with hopes of bringing enlightenment to the world, she's also a human woman, and her body is fragile, and even the goddesses acknowledge this. So a bunch of stuff happens in a bunch of different texts and traditions that try to speak to why it is that the Buddha came out of her right side. So they say, and why she died. Oh, she was karmically ordained to die. One tradition says, well, she can't possibly think about having sex again after this because then she'd be impure. One even says that she died because she was so overcome with joy. But all of this finger pointing distracts from the elephant in the room. As Garling states, reading these stories millennia later with a modicum of common sense, it becomes obvious that Maya died from childbirth. Possibly she lingered until the 7th day or so postpartum, as the legends insist. Or perhaps the 7th day detail was invented to distance the death from the birth. Possibly, too, the element of the bodhisattva's requisite 10-month gestation arose as a rationalization around Maya's actual pregnancy, extending unnaturally past a normal due date, which gave rise to fatal complications. In any case, maternal and infant mortality would have been commonplace. As it is, we see how painstakingly their narrative works to deflect blame away from the infant bodhisattva. Indeed, it must have been distressing to the people and emerging Buddhist culture of the time to imagine that he, the ambassador of compassion and loving kindness to the world, could in any way, however innocently, be a source of harm or human suffering, especially concerning his mother. Reconciling that with the tragedy of Maya's death was storyteller's challenge. Surely, for a woman so beloved by her husband and her people, the death must have come as a shocking blow. Garland goes on to remind us as well that scholars have speculated with the detail of the right-sided birth, that could have actually been the storyteller's spin on a possible C-section performed on Maya. This and other surgical procedures did happen at this time. They were known to be happening in ancient cultures, including India. Although C-sections were only performed on dead or dying women in an effort to save the child, which gives us a little more ammunition for what might have been going on with Maya. And the legends do say that upon her death, she was immediately transported to a celestial realm where she enjoyed the reverence of the gods. But as you see in a lot of the traditions and stories, she is involved still as a loving mother throughout the Buddha's life. She crops up in different stories. She descends from the heavens to watch over him. So we can see that she is a figure who never really leaves his life, and never truly stops loving him as a mother does. I think removing this aspect of the story, or rather hiding it, changing it, does a great disservice to women. At the end of the day, Maya was a human woman who gave birth to a human son, who went on to do incredible things, historically, religiously, mythologically, whatever. When we look at how Maya died, women of today are connected to this woman of the past. Childbirth still is incredibly dangerous, especially with men in positions of power trying to regulate when and where women give birth and how they give birth. You know, there is significance in Maya being surrounded by women, going to her familial homelands and give birth in a sacred grove. She stands up, she grabs a tree. That's a powerful pose that she's in when the baby is removed from her right side. She is in control in the story of when she goes to give birth, where she goes to give birth, and who is surrounding her. Unfortunately, she dies anyway. Women today still have much to fear from childbirth. Black women and women of color especially are affected disproportionately from complications from childbirth. And more women are suffering postpartum depression and are taking their own lives. Women today are being told when they should birth, how they should birth, and yet the minute they birth, they are left alone to fend for themselves. When we look back at a figure like Maya, I can't help but feel connected to her, even though I'm not a mother yet. She dies. Her body is ravaged. Her body experiences pain. And she dies from complications to childbirth. And even though she was a queen, the mother of the Buddha, her story was still rewritten and minimized. Her pain was minimized so that we could shine this beautiful, brilliant light on her son instead. And I think that we should remember Maya, and we should remember Maya's sacrifice, and use her as a powerful inspiration for women in childbirth, women seeking to give birth, women seeking to regain some of their own autonomy, their own control over their birth story, control over how they birth, where they birth, and when they birth. Maya wasn't alone in that grove. Actually, it is said that her sister, Mahaprajapati, was holding on to her side, as I mentioned, assisting her in childbirth. And so, in this way, sort of taking part in the birth prophetically together, and it is Maya's sister, Mahaprajapati, that raises the Buddha as her stepson. Well, she is the stepmother, becomes is already the wife to the queen, becomes the main wife to the queen, to the king, but she raises Siddhartha as her own. And she goes on to become the very first Buddhist nun and the greatest nun during the Buddhist time. So not only was the Buddha raised by his aunt, but he was also raised in a harem of women. So what would have happened is that he would have been raised in the women's quarters of the palace. Castle. I said castle earlier. I was looking for palace. Of the palace, surrounded by women. So his father would have had multiple wives. He also would have had concubines and consorts and that sort of thing. So the children were raised in the women's quarters with the mothers. And that would have meant that he also would have been raised with his half siblings. And I think that's really beautiful. There's this huge, giant community of women and children that are raising the Buddha. And I can't imagine that being raised in such close proximity to women did not have a massive impact on how the Buddha thought about women. And when all of these other cultures came in and brought with them more patriarchal means of thinking, we can see how the original teachings of the Buddha clash with the revisions that were made. Now, getting back to Mahaprajapati, towards after the Buddha achieves enlightenment and he comes back to Kapilavastu, to his people, to the Shakya clan, to teach them his ways and his enlightenment, he comes back and he sees his stepmother again. And he teaches his stepmother about the Four Noble Truths, for example, and all of these other teachings that will lead to her enlightenment. And it is said that she understood them so well. Garling says Mahaprajapati readily understands her son's meaning on these topics, so the Buddha goes on to teach her the Four Noble Truths. And by the conclusion of the evening, she has attained clear Dharma insight, pure and unsullied, into the nature of reality. So because she grasped these teachings so well, she goes on to become the first and foremost of the early Buddhist nuns. And she becomes sort of like a saint in a way, and all the other women of the clan fall in line to follow her. And many women from the Shakya clan and from other places come and they seek to be in the council of Mahaprajapati. And what's significant about the Buddha coming back and teaching his stepmom the Four Noble Truths and all these other teachings to gain enlightenment is that during that time, he was only preaching to women during that specific event. And that's really significant because events like that are minimized throughout the literature. I want to turn quickly to the third mother that we're talking about today, Sujata. So Sujata was the daughter of a wealthy chieftain from a nearby village where the Buddha was practicing asceticism. And he's on the brink of death. And he turns back from the brink of death and he realizes, well, this is not working. This is not the way towards enlightenment. I need to do something else. I need to find the middle way. And it is thanks to Sujata that he finds the middle way and he gains enlightenment. So Sujata had prayed to tree spirits saying that she wants to marry well and have children. And after this happens, she says, okay, I'm going to go leave my offerings now. She has a son, so she's a nursing mother at this time. And she says, I'm going to go leave my offerings to the tree spirits like I said I would. And this is how she encounters the Buddha. She sends her servant to go find, a good tree. I'm really truncating this. You should really read the book. And the Buddha has taken shelter under this particular tree, and her servant comes back and says, I found a tree spirit, it's glowing, this glowing aura. And so Sujata makes a meal of rice milk. And she brings him this offering of rice milk in a golden bowl. Unbeknownst to her, he is about to become the Buddha, and the legend states that you offer the Buddha a golden bowl on the day of his enlightenment. She doesn't know any of this. Instead, she painstakingly creates this rice milk that mirrors what you would give to a baby for baby food. And she offers it to him, and she lays her praises upon him. But what's significant here is that a meal prepared from a lactating mother given to the Buddha, he takes this food from this woman's hand and he achieves enlightenment, and he is sustained on his enlightenment journey thanks to her meal of rice milk. So we're typically told that her offering is the first nourishment that the Buddha takes after near starvation, and it marks the end of his years of austerities. And symbolically, it illustrates his discovery of the middle way and his return to inner balance and a valid quest for enlightenment. So Sujata's offering breaks his fast and marks the beginning of his enlightenment journey. And we're often told that in past lifetimes, this was also Sujata's task. There are a couple of variations on Sujata's relationship to the Buddha, depending on which text that you're reading. But many of them mention that she was his mother in many other lifetimes. And what's significant about Sujata, not just that she is a lactating woman who has just given birth and gives this offering to the Buddha that sets him on that helps him attain enlightenment that very day, but she becomes the first woman disciple to the Buddha of Buddhism, which it's not called just yet. So as we can see from this very brief foray into the lives of these three women, the Buddha has these women, these mothers, along with various other women, like his wives. You should definitely read up about his wives, on his journey to enlightenment and beyond. Not just his birth, his enlightenment, so his birth, his rebirth in his humanly form, and at his death, his mother comes back down. His death, his mother comes back down, and they have a beautiful, loving exchange one last time as he is being burned and sent up into the celestial realms. So at his birth, his rebirth, and his death, it is women who are there to tend to him, and women who spark change in the lives of those around them and in the life of the Buddha as well. And of course, these things, like with all the other religious traditions I've talked about thus far and will continue to talk about, women's roles are often minimized, if not completely eradicated from these tales. And I am sick of it. Not just am I sick of it, but the implications for women today are paramount. You know, there's a lot of scholarly debate in terms of the Buddhist texts and the roles of women within those texts, but I would argue there's scholarly debate in all of the religious traditions about women's roles and their significance and their rights and the rights that are afforded to them. And I know, I can speak for myself personally as well, that turning to religious traditions for feminism seems like an oxymoron of sorts, right? Because it is often religion that seeks to take our rights away or assert power or dominance over us. But if we actually looked at many religious traditions, many of the texts, and look at how these texts were changed and piece together the truth of women's stories and women's lives, I actually think that religion could be a powerful tool for feminism and for womanism and for feminist reclamation and divine feminine reclamation. But it takes a lot of work. And even in a lot of the work that I do, goddess studies, for example, if you don't approach it from the most academic way you possibly can, you're looked at like you're a crazy person for believing that God is a woman. As if we're not like more than 50% of the population. So if this is something that interests you, I encourage you to dig deep into these texts that exist and see what the imagery is saying. It's sometimes hard because you've got to look big picture. You've sort of got to zoom out and see what, sacred symbolism. You have to have a sort of understanding that at one point, um, the earth is considered to be feminine, and so things like sacred groves and trees and caves and rock formations and flowers and celestial bodies and water, like, you have to look at it for its symbolism as well, because sometimes it can be lost on the modern reader. And that's what I'm trying to do here continuously. Find the spaces, reclaim the spaces where women's divine power flourishes. And so I hope you'll continue to join me on this journey. If you like this video, leave a comment, like, subscribe, hit the bell. But I'd love to know your own experiences as a woman with the divine. Thanks. See you next time.